Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones, the unvisited ones, the cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, in what is now just as much of a New Year's tradition as pretending to have fun or crying in an Uber, we welcome back to the show Conner Habib for our annual dose of perspective and early January pep talk. Because 2020 is a very different animal to 2019 in a lot of ways. And so this is our saltiest conversation yet. The changing conditions require a frankness or a directness that the last few times didn't. So this isn't done for shock value or to start drama. It's done for the same reason we do all these shows, because I think this is the most medicinal approach for now. The goal remains the same. The approach is a little different. Still fun, though. Spicy podcasts are always fun. So let's do it. Hey, Pork Chop. Welcome back.
Wow. I've been upgraded from, what was it last time? Schnookums? Sugar plum?
No, it's pumpkin. There was a pumpkin thing in there. Yeah.
But yeah, we're moving into a savory year.
Savory mood. Higher protein, it's the beginning of the year. People are doing low carb,
Yep.
So, we do this again. I mean, it feels like it came around kind of quick. I'm not going to lie.
Not for me, but that's mostly because you have too. I mean, there's been so much in this year, and I've experienced a lot of that as like a lot of long time, but not in a bad way. It's just there's been so much, and I think for you too. But major life shifts and changes can lead you to experience time in different ways.
Yeah. 29 feel like, because I effectively skipped a summer, I'm not sure how, 28 and 2019 both feel like the same year to me because of having to suspend things a bunch of times. And, but yeah, it's weird. I mean, we chat a little bit on the internet, so maybe that's where my confusion, lies. But you did mention your 2019, and I feel like that's perhaps where we should start. How was your year, Conner?
It was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And just a quick rehash for everyone. I moved to Ireland, which has been a lifelong dream. I started a PhD program, and I'm investigating through that PhD program people's paranormal, supernatural experiences and how those affect them. I had a very close friend of mine die and cross the threshold. A friend of mine since I was 9 years old. My mom, who's also dead, was his teacher. I finished writing a novel. I have continued to do Against Everyone with Conner Habib, and had some guests on who are true heroes of mine for years and years, like Franco Bifabrati and Billy Bragg and so forth. On and on. There was so much going on this year. And in some ways, I looked at how other people were experiencing the year, and I just thought, why are they having different experiences? Why is the year seem to be running in a different way for other people? And then, of course, when I talk to a lot of magically or spiritually, occultly inclined people, they seem to have similar kinds of years, rather than being sort of stuck in the soup of, not the rune soup, but the soup of anxiety, and feeling like they were living under in a dictatorship. They actually felt like they were these sort of emperors and empresses and others of their own lives, and really in that conversation between their freedom and destiny. And so you can get two very different pictures of how 2019 went. And I'm sure that mine is resonating with some of the sort of magically activated people, and some of the people who are not are like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, definitely. Let's do, because it's always fun for me to watch people like sort of live their first year abroad, because there are some actual universals in it. And as a result, I'm going to ask you some questions about that, because I think this kind of stuff is interesting. What is the thing that annoys you the most about Dublin?
Well, the thing that annoys me the most about Dublin is the thing that annoys me most about San Francisco. In other words, Dublin is making a lot of mistakes that San Francisco has made, and that's because it's under a sort of like tech loyalist. I call them tech loyalists because loyalist is a very loaded term in Ireland, but that's how I view them. Sort of tech loyalist politicians who are the city, and to some extent, a lesser extent, the country. They just don't. They care about development and hotels and all that kind of shit at the expense of, you know, the erosion of culture, and that really does annoy me. Like, the city council is creating a whitewater rafting park. Like, can you imagine a stupider idea?
It's right up there. I saw you tweet about it. And I mean, I know the area you're talking about, because I would in fact go to Dublin with some regularity on tech business. Like, that's where Google is. And so I'm looking at it going, what the fuck is this is amazing. Like, what kind of, it is like, if it actually cost more, I think it would be some sort of money laundering scam, because like it's so improbable. It's just like having a permanently on fire pile of tires, like in Springfield. Like, you go, what? This is just a completely confusing addition to a city. I mean, when they build it, if they build it, I'm still totally going on it. But
there'll be no avoiding that. But I do think that, like, it is a perfect example. I mean, you know, we can have the fun version of this conversation, but there's a spiritual aspect to it too, which is a perfect example of how, you know, an illustration of how, like, basically neoliberals or tech loyalists or extra statecraft assholes, or whatever name you want to give these kinds of people, are totally intent on obliterating culture, and how they like go hand in hand with these kinds of old, like, we want old Ireland back, like fascist assholes who, you know, like are trying, like, think that they're preserving some sort of like imaginary past, and these people think that they're creating an imaginary future, and they're both doing the same thing, which is just trampling over people and ruining everybody's, you know, well, just, you know, ruining the city. It's like, this is the first place where, you know, like, I can say I don't want Dublin to die young. But what I really mean is, like, I don't want it to die into youth, because the youthfulness of the things that are happening, the newness, is really fucking terrible in Dublin. And that is really annoying. That annoys me. It's not just like hitting me on some political level. It annoys me to see the cranes. It annoys me to see people, you know, some people, especially the people that work at tech companies, buying into it and thinking it's cool, where, you know, having moved there from San Francisco, you know, or, well, from California. I lived in San Francisco for 6 years, then LA for 5. LA is much better. But I, you know, moved from California, and having been in San Francisco, just being like, you guys, like, this isn't anything like new or innovative. Like, the idiots that live in San Francisco that destroy that city and continue to destroy it like some giant consuming garbage monster, like, you're just doing what they did, you know, 10 years ago. So it's not really innovative.
No,
Even construction is boring.
Yeah, it's not. And the interest in it, I find the most alarming, right? So for people to be bullish or excited about it, it shows that they're participating in like a global pseudo culture that swamps the planet. Like, it's artificial. And I think what alarms me is they don't realize it is. They think it is, that it's synthetic, but it's the same thing around the planet. It's like a cosmic version of the Airbnb aesthetic. Like, it's everywhere. And that's,
it is. Yeah. It's a being. That's a being, man. And I think that, like, the thing that's different about Ireland, which is great, is that there is a spiritual quality to Ireland that I think outsiders actually can feel a little bit more present than people who have lived there their whole lives, because it's just part of who they are. That, like, it's an anti bullshit spiritual current. The way anthroposophists would frame it is it's an anti-Luciferic impulse, meaning like you can't get lost in these sort of lofty heights for too long in Ireland. Like the land itself and the island itself has a counterforce to that, which is like pro-humanity, which is great. So you interestingly see Irish people hearing about the whitewater rafting part, and like they're even if they're pro it, but like the vast majority of people who are against it, they're like, well, you know what, like that sucks that they say they're going to spend 23 million euro on that, but the economy of Europe and this country is going to collapse next year, so it's not a big deal anyway. They're not going to be able to finish it. Like they're able to see into the heart of the future and what's coming, and like be ready for that and to participate in it, you know.
Yeah, it seems like there's no way any European country does anything for 23 million euro. That's how much Brussels spends on baguettes in a morning. Like when I saw that, I'm like, no, come on, this is going to be one of those giant, hilarious albatrosses where it takes 11 years and costs 2 billion euro. Like the euro will not exist by the time this project is complete. That's how stupid this is. Anyway.
There's going to be an amazing documentary about it. You know,
absolutely. That's going to be a film festival to go to, right? But that's seeing the positive. That's definitely seeing the positive.
I'm excited for it. Hodorowski's Water Park. It'll be called or something. Anyway,
I guess it's funny you mentioned it that way, but seeing the positive is sort of like where we had the discussion last year / this year. It's December 31, so we had it this year, but you know what I mean. Last end of year special, and I'm not sure if that's the energy we want to bring. Like it is, but I think the energy for this conversation, facing what is going to be a very different year, needs to necessarily be different. So it's certainly hope rather than nihilism, and I said before, like optimism is a spell. So on a personal basis, yes, but as we're putting the questions together and kind of bouncing backwards and forwards over the topics we wish to discuss today, it is different in tone, isn't it?
It's very different in tone. I'm really excited for it, as I always am. Honestly, because what the fuck else are you going to do? You know, you might as well get excited about it. But I would say that this year, that 2020, is really the most Michaelic year that's been since I've been born, I would say. And what I mean by that is I'm referencing the Archangel Michael. And what I'm talking about is the quality of Michael that says, look to yourself to do what you expect the world or the spiritual world or whatever to do for you. So when we celebrate Michaelmas, for example, in September, the idea is that the fall is happening, the world is sort of turning in on itself, the leaves are coming down, all the stuff that was sort of out there in summer available to see and experience and touch is now up to you to experience inwardly. So as we enter into this Michaelic year, so much of what needs to be done is us going in and creating the light ourselves, which is actually something you talked about a lot with Austin on your astrology episode. And with that, interestingly, when you go in and you do that work yourself and you radiate the light, you then align yourself with the proper spirit of the year, which is Michael, and you assist him in doing his work. But it's on us in a really interesting way that it wasn't quite on us last year. Like last year was all about sort of maneuvering with what was there and sort of getting into the right inertia, the right swing of things, all that kind of stuff. This is a lot more about us, which gives us a lot more opportunities. And then as we do that, it actually kind of hooks us up with the right current anyway.
Yeah, the overall feel is more tactical, right? So I think, whereas before, and it's not that one shouldn't do this, but I kind of feel like we should be lovingly mean with people's excuses and so on, like in this show, but also throughout the year. There's a reality to 2020 where it's not, and the difference that Austin and I spoke about was essentially the condition of Jupiter, where at the beginning of 2019, it's sort of like, take some time to imagine your perfect future and all that kind of thing. Whatever, like, it's in play, just fucking do some stuff. That's 2020. It's actually it's more tactical and
right.
hardened, and so that that cry out to bigger forces to save or improve things is not what we bring into 2020. And that's what I mean by being lovingly mean. Like, the advice this time around needs to be gently rolling up the newspaper and smacking some people on the nose for some stuff that needs to be left behind, because it will not serve you or the world in 2020.
Well, right. And the way I would frame that, if we want to kind of talk about it in a non-astrological way, but just sort of a self-improvement way, I would just say, what do we want to bring forward? Like, that's the question to ask yourself now, but also to ask yourself throughout the year. And it could be your own bullshit. It could be your own, whatever it was that you were doing, whatever patterns you were stuck in. Maybe it's just you don't forgive yourself enough. Maybe it's whatever. But ask yourself, whenever you're in a sense or a tension of conflict with yourself or with others, say, what do I want to bring forward into this year? Because there really is a sense of a lot of us sort of stepping forward into something this year. And do we assume the role that we have built for ourselves since 2010? Well, I mean, really our whole lives, but really since 2010, maybe a little bit before then. Are we ready to assume those roles? Or are we going to just sort of, linger and, luxuriate in the cycles and the patterns that we've been stuck in? So I would really say, what do we want to bring forward? And that also, in the way you're saying it, also it implies, well, what do we want to leave behind? And there's a lot to leave behind, and there's a lot for us to bring forward. What we bring forward is a little more individual. What we leave behind is some of the sort of cultural, soul, cosmic, spiritual junk that's plagued us for a while.
Yeah, cosmic spiritual junk, or even to make it less nice than that, as like some fucking excuses, right? Like, it's 2020. Stop planning the whitewater rafting experience and build it. Like, it's and there's a bunch of stuff just from a discourse perspective that I think. In previous years, I'd been patient with people's inevitably people not necessarily catch up to me in like an arrogant way. I don't mean it like that. Inevitably, people drop some unhelpful or inaccurate ideas in their own time. Is what I'm trying to say, and that has sort of happened. But as we're kind of shaking the last few drops of, particularly in the magical world, that sort of idiocy out, I think a cleanup needs to be done. I think there are certain areas of how we talk, not even what we talk about, that
totally
that needs to be actually, and not called it. I hate the combative terms, that the very American style terms, not like calling people out for things or whatever, but stopping and highlighting when a term is used in a way that is, it's often kind of like accidental class warfare, it's accidental racism, it's always imperialism, and so on, and that kind of stuff I've been gentle with over the last few years. Like, people will get there, and if they're interested, we can have the discussion. But now there seems to be an urgency in how we, and it's a very 2020 mood, how we talking about things, so that we don't have such a wasteland of discussion that I think we've had over the last year. Like, honestly, I'm in a bit of a low point at the moment. I'm kind of tired, and I'm putting this stuff together. I can't tell if a lot of the world has always been dumb, or if they've gotten dumber in 2019. And I think it's a bit of both. I think it's sort of what happens at this point in the timeline. But like, putting together the topic areas we're going to discuss today, I'm like, oh man, that's right, that happened.
Yeah, well, there's so much to go over on that level. A way that I would say it is like, white noise is a huge challenge for us right now. So it's partially about cutting through the noise and finding what's real. But one of the ways that we would do that is to say, look, people, very often the problem is coming from the very people who believe that they're doing good in the world. And the reason why is not because they're stupid or they're wrong. Well, sometimes they're stupid and sometimes they're wrong and sometimes they're both. But it's because people are so naive that to think that when they're working with a social justice kind of current, or they're working with, sort of class analysis current, or whatever it might be, or environmentalism, they're not understanding that the substance that they're working with also has a kind of negative counter aspect to it. They believe that the substance they're working with is pure and allows them to purely critique what everybody else is doing. But in fact, ideas about racism, ideas about sexism, about homophobia, ideas about the environment and the earth, ideas about class, they all have their challenge. And we need to be courageous enough to meet the challenges of the substance that we're using to approach and confront the problems of our time. It can't just be that we think simply because we're making the critique of, the bad oppressive forces or whatever, that somehow we are rendered innocent. We're not. And the substance that we're using has power, and it can do bad things in the world as well. And we need to take that up, and we need to take that challenge up and have the courage to stand up to the powers of thought that we're working with.
Yes, I'm going to say that in a more negative way, but I 100% agree, which is all these weapons come to us bloody. And they're useful, but if you pretend the blood isn't there, you are a fucking tyrant. And to be honest, some of this discourse has descended into bullying in the magical world from people who have confused, as you say, like it's a progressive mind virus, which is confusing the existence of a problem, or conflating the existence of a problem with your preferred solution as if it is perfect and holy, and any kind of feedback to that is tipped into this like alt-right binary or something, and it's dumb and dangerous, and it's having negative impacts. Half the time it's racist. Like it's just a fucking mess. And this is what I mean by being lovingly mean, is not to start an argument, but to find a patient way. And it's a real kind of extended Capricorn season energy of kind, as you said before, like cutting through the white noise to get at the truth or the hard reality of a situation. And it's almost like it's all the things you're about to discuss are a subset of this era of refusing to believe that the weapons in your hand came to you bloody because they did, because that's what happens here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And also, like, maybe we're doing like a good, they cop, maybe it's like good wizard, bad wizard or something like that. But like, I again have a nicer thing to say about it, which is like, I think it's the Joseph Beuys quote where he says something like, life is too short to choose a weapon without blood on it, or something like that. He says something like that. It's like, yes, they come to us bloody. We don't have a choice to not have a bloody weapon.
Yeah. That's
so,
a real good way of thinking about it. Yes.
Yeah. So, but you're right. Like, then the duty is to say, okay, there's blood on this. Now what do I do? And that, that's with everything too. It's not just with our thoughts. It's with all our technologies. It's with everything. I mean, it's with agriculture. It's with eating animals and plants. I mean, it's all that. It's like, let's be consistent and acknowledge, the killing aspects of who we are. And I think that's, the question I always ask is like, what is the human being? And, the answer includes death, destruction, and violence. And we might as well take that on, in everything we do and understand it.
Cool. All right. Well, let's try that with with the first sort of macro topic area, I suppose. What are we to do with what manufactured outrage, Conner? What are we to do?
There's a lot, right? There's a lot. And my sort of way of saying it now is if you're outraged, so, like the phrase, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. If you're outraged, you're not paying attention is the way that I'm saying it now. It's like you're not paying attention to the spiritual aspect of your being, and the world where you can find a sort of, shred of you or a piece of you that is, allows you to see your inner self is never suffering, and that you can approach these problems from a non-materialistic standpoint that allows you to not be outraged and actually do something about it. The outrage is really about paralyzing yourself, or really about not having any responsibility and not doing anything. At this point, it is. I'm not saying that we can't be shocked, but the amount and the lingering, and the length and the duration of the outrage is pretty preposterous at this moment. And I think we're generating that kind of outrage because because frankly, it gives the illusion of action at this point.
Yes,
it really gives the illusion of action.
It's a fucking crutch, and the big change, well, not even big change, the inevitable development in the sphere of manufactured outrage is now, dare I say, both sides have weaponized it, right? So you, from a culture manipulation perspective, outrage is literally manufactured to have certain discussions happen in culture. That's like absolutely the case. But by the same token, particularly, and we will get to Twitter as a special case, by the same token, there appears to be some sort of brownie points and some deranged competition in hell for the person who can reach the summit of manufactured outrage first and with the most outrage points. And this, which is driving the actual polarize is such a dumb word for it, but it's driving the actual splitting apart inertia of culture and discourse in the first place. And it's all dumb. Like, this is what I mean. It's dumb. It is a dumb thing. And I would echo like something Katherine Fitz said years ago, which I really, really like. And it's sort of like your switcheroo of if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. She said, the situation is too serious for us to afford the luxury of being angry. And that is just absolutely reading most of Twitter to filth. To be angry in a serious situation is a fucking luxury. Like, there you are tweeting your outrage on a slave-made device like your shit doesn't stink. No more of that in 2020. And I think that's what I mean. Like, let's sort of lovingly be mean and kind of gently but firmly make this point when it happens.
And also, let's not get lost in other people's outrage as if it matters anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, we'll probably come to this at some point, so I might as well say it now. What was it, like a few weeks ago or something, when Jeremy Corbyn and Labour lost the election, I tweeted something about maybe socialism isn't the project that's going to win the day anymore, any more than liberalism is. So it's time to start listening to occultists. And of course, the people that like me, they got it. They really liked it. People were into it and they had questions. And then because some of those were sort of interesting, thoughtful socialists, they retweeted it. And then it went out into the socialism sphere where, and actually what I said was dialectical materialist socialism isn't working anymore, which
very specific.
We can talk about that as a point too. I think it's worthwhile, but I didn't even say socialism was bad, and people lost their minds, thousands and thousands of retweets and likes of people just being pissed off that I said this. And it didn't bother me at all. And I've had dog piles in the past that have bothered me, but at this point in time, I just thought, the outrage is fake. It's also completely impotent. It's not doing anything anymore.
Yes.
It has no power behind it. And that's how you know. That's how you know it's over, and that it is luxuriant, and that it's about paralysis and inaction. It just doesn't have any potency. It's lost its power.
And the journey from that to a real thing is absolutely the Capricorn 2020 journey. Absolutely. And that's just a really wonderful way of describing it. But let's so that more people can pile on you, Conner, in particular. What is dialectical materialism?
Well, look, there are lots of versions of what dialectical materialism is. People sort of misunderstood me. They were like, well, that's not even like political economy or whatever. And all I was saying, it was very interesting to me how many so-called socialists and Marxists didn't understand what dialectical materialism was themselves.
Anyway.
But like, basically, it's a form of refined materialism that says material conditions come before ideologies, and struggles between different kinds of material conditions produce different ideologies. That's it, right? And there are lots of different versions of it, and a lot of them go back to Hegel, but basically it's saying that like material conditions are first, and that they produce in tension, they produce different kinds of ideas and concepts and aesthetics and all that kind of stuff that funnel back into the system and so forth. It's a feedback loop. So, yeah, sorry.
Well, it's worth emphasizing, because why you would hold that up in comparison to a healthier metaphysics is that it is exclusively material conditions, and it's most commonly used where people don't understand it in a model of history where the only thing that drives the inertia of history is material conditions in the materialist sense. And so you kind of have that a dialectical materialist read of history is essentially that the only mechanism of change in human culture is essentially class conflict, and has been for 50,000 years. If you do magic, that is some bullshit. And you can say that, and you can say that without saying, well, quite clearly, class conflict is an impact in how culture plays out, of course. However, the whole point you were making is it is not the sole source of like inertia in human flourishing and the human experience of time. And that's because it's a dumb idea. That's what you like. I was surprised at how many people either hadn't interrogated it, because the people who are doing, dare I say, left theory correctly have kind of looked at that and gone, well, that's funnily enough, it's a mental artifact of its time that we have moved past. But yeah, it was so weird looking at the takes on those on those reads, going, goodness. And you're right, I guess it doesn't matter that they're wrong, because, as you say, it is impotent and pointless and indulgent. But it was kind of surprising that, in addition to that, if it doesn't matter, why would you also be wrong?
Well, the funny thing is, like, when I looked at it and thought about the last two pylons that I had, like the big ones, one was about saying, this was years ago, I said, like, sex it's supposed to feel good. It's basically neutral, right? And this was interpreted by, thousands of people. This was really hard for me because it was the first time it had ever happened to me. Thousands of people of me saying, like, just lay back and take it, women, like, they didn't even know that I was gay and whatever. And so it was very funny to me that is now an accepted idea. And the second one was, when Kevin Spacey was accused of whatever, violating someone's consent and whatever. I was like, look, that guy is telling the truth. This sucks. And also, gay people have a different way of signaling consent than straight people, and we should be careful about how we, parse these things out. Historically, there are different currents of consent and different ways of defining it. Now everybody accepts that too. So what I saw also was like, oh, these people are just getting to agree with me, which also seems like a really good sign. And that is part of the performance of outrage, is not allowing yourself to investigate something because you're afraid of it. So you perform the outrage so you don't have to go deeper into it. But there's a reason why you perform it, to not have to go deeper into it, because if you did, you might reveal something to yourself. And so I just kind of viewed people as getting ready to agree with me, which in fact a lot of socialists actually did. And, of course, the ones that I've done shows with and talked to and all that, they know that I'm deeply invested in a certain version of socialism, which I think we can talk about as well on the show. And I think that's, I think that dialectical materialist idea, it's very interesting. It's produced a lot of interesting thought, a lot of interesting ideas for how material interacts with other material and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, we need to move on, and we need to do something else now.
Yeah. I want to pick up on what you said there about it, because we can kind of turn it into a gentle but loving piece of advice around if you experience outrage, almost take it as like inflammation in the body, like take it as a signal that, wait, what's underneath this that's actually causing the outrage rather than going for the surface or the symptom, right? Because that that will point you at things that you're kind of cutting through the noise and getting down to the sort of 2020 truth. That will point you to that kind of stuff. And like a bugbear for me, which is on that, I suppose, is like witchcraft and whiteness at the moment. When I had Mitch on the show talking about the occult revival, and I'm still bullish about it, as was he, that like this one will probably stick in one way, shape, or form. But unfortunately, the sort of death rattle of Brooklyn social media managers taking pictures of it, of like a feather on Instagram will curse the president. The sort of tail end of that idiotic death rattle is once again we have this glib association of a very, very white middle class reading of history that of witchcraft that is I did a whole show about it in a nice way last year as a solo show for Halloween if people want to listen to it, but like it's the time has come to gently but firmly call racist on that when people do it, because I waited for them to catch up, and most people have, but for the lingering parts, it falls to us all to, again, don't start picking fights on the goddamn internet. That will do nothing. But gently but firmly suggest to people, which is true, that is a racist position to take.
And it's not like, let's add to that, because so yes, there's a colonialist racist aspect to it. And also like the idea how do I put that? Let me sort of tie it back into the socialism piece. Like the people who are like into socialism and Marxism and are like, well, witchcraft is okay because that's all about like women not being, productive in a capitalist economy at a certain time. And that's why, they were persecuted and blah, blah, blah. Like that idea is also like that colonialist racist piece that doesn't engage with the many people that engage with witchcraft. But there's also this other piece of it that I want to talk about, which is like it's mostly white people that do this, where like they think that all they have to read about witchcraft is some, like article. It's not even original. It's not even source material. It's like an article about Silvia Federici, like saying that they did this, I did that. And when you counter them, they're like, oh, well, you obviously don't understand Mark theory. And it's like, well, I've read all that, but have you read anything about witchcraft from witches? Have you read any actual, if you don't even want to go to like source text from people in different cultures practicing witchcraft, which there's plenty of, have you read any ethnographies of witchcraft in different cultures? Have you talked to any people that are practicing now? Have you read any occult books? And I think that idea where the burden of ignorance always lies on the person that's talking about magic and the occult is also its own version of racism. It's also its own version of whiteness, I
like that.
And so I think there are different ways in which it plays out. And there's definitely the Brooklyn hipster aesthetic kind of exclusionary racism that also, but those things they all sort of tie in and go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's and the other part, that's a really interesting perspective on what ethnic or cultural backgrounds and experience levels we look to as expertise in a discussion being unexamined, right? Like, because the other side of it that I'm finding very frustrating, and I think it's a 2019 change as we're in this. It's a weird way of saying it. So when Austin and I did the event in Portland, the witch in culture bubble had passed, and the astrology one is passing, which is to say they don't go away, but like their moment in the spotlight has kind of changed, which is why there seems to be some late last 6 months of this year like death rattle or denouement to the witchcraft one that came afterwards. And one of the things is some of the voices that are talking at the moment, pretending to be more experienced than they actually are, is I put it in there with the witchcraft and whiteness stuff because it's all in this mess of, if you don't look at, it's that Dame Marilyn Strathern thing that I'm a fan of, like, it matters what thoughts we think with. If you're just flapping your heads pretending you've been doing magic or witchcraft for 20 years, I can't. I don't know other than lovingly suggest and firmly suggest that in fact the position is racist to say that historically the witch is exclusively some sort of archetypal symbol of female self-sovereignty, which is barely accurate in like early modern England or Northwest Europe anyway. It was in fact like a despised profession of last resort. Anyway, even if that is, and it is certainly true in the last 70 years, it is a tiny subset of what is a much bigger and dangerous and magical idea everywhere brown on the planet.
Right. Well, I think what you're pointing to, I mean, there are plenty of people who are like, we're witches, we have our coven and all that kind of bullshit, right? And we are seeing that a lot with cis straight white women. There are plenty of other people that are doing it as well, and I'm also cis, so I can't not claim that privilege there. But I just think it's like, what you're seeing is a lot of people saying that they're, like you said, like that they've been practicing witchcraft and all that kind of stuff. And I think, the trouble in articulating what's wrong with that is that we haven't done a lot of critique that blends a critique of materialism with a critique of, white supremacy, with a critique of classism, with a blah, blah, blah. Like, we're not bringing our ideas about what is problematic about materialism to these other conversations, and so we get sort of like lost in the woods,
Yeah.
And so it's like when someone says, "Oh, I'm doing witchcraft," and it's like they're Instagramming pictures of their cups of coffee and maybe doing like a vision board where Donald Trump is like getting a scolding from somebody or whatever it is. I think we're not able to see that there's a whole critique that needs to happen there, because otherwise you can be accused of all sorts of sort of justice violations. And it's like, well, I appreciate that aspect of it, but there's also a materialism component that we're not talking about here, and we need to bring it all together. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. It's the same unexamined thing, right? So if you think witchcraft is Instagram feminism, you don't think magic is real.
Right, exactly.
And you don't think magic is real because you live in an unexamined materialist construct that you inherited. And that's where, like, I'm alarmed. On the one hand, I'm annoyed. And on the other hand, I don't give a fuck, which is a really exciting position to be in. Real, love that for me. But that is the side effect of people pretending to be more experienced than they actually are, and kind of shitting out this ersatz performative thing, which would be fine if they just owned it in a wider planetary context. Like, I actually don't care what people do, but the time has come in 2020, bringing some Capricorn realness to go, actually, what you are doing is not the story of witchcraft. It is a tiny, tiny footnote in it from a cultural and historical perspective. It is still valid. It is, however, a footnote. Please come with me on this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that what you're pointing to is, I can't remember if we talked about this on previous shows, but it's like someone who says, I'm really into like alternative medicine. And you're like, well, what? And they're like, well, I take vitamin C instead of this, right? or whatever it is, where it's like, well, they're just swapping out one materialistic thing for another materialistic thing. I mean, yes, vitamin C is probably better for you than some of the drugs that you might take and might have less side effects, but it's not actually an alternative. That's just materialistic medicine. Like, it's just the same thing with a different drug, right? And so, or a different kind of substance. And so I think what we're looking for in this coming year is actually a step away from just sort of these kinds of veiled, tricky kinds of materialism and into a genuine spiritual condition. So
right.
like something that I've been thinking about a lot is this idea that like, what if, like we talk so much, even the word bodies, it's like this justice term. We talk about bodies
yes.
all the time.
See, I'm glad you're going here because I was going to prompt the conversation. It's a note you put in like body/material conditions are not the site of action in 2020. And I fucking love that. Tell people what you mean because some monocles just fell in some martini glasses.
Well, so much of our conversation up till now has been around bodily autonomy, bodily freedom, boundaries and consent around bodies, all that kind of stuff. Now, I think it's important that we walk through those lessons and we understand them and we see what they give to us. And so I'm not saying that we should dispose all the lessons that we gained from them, but what if the body and material conditions are not the site of action? So let me sort of reframe this again before I get into the sort of deeper point. Like there's a nuclear power plant in UK, right? And it's sort of on the other side of the ocean from Ireland, from the sea from Ireland. And people who live in Ireland across the sea from that power plant, when they were kids, they would get iodine capsules all the time, right? Like the government gave them iodine capsules as if that would somehow, and of course there was a huge cancer, flourishing in that area. Why am I bringing this up? So like, there's a way in which the world has turned to forces that seem so out of control that people are like, well, I'm going to pull the site of my freedom towards the body. So I'm going to take iodine capsules, or I'm going to go get this treatment or this treatment or this treatment to make my body more immune to the things that are happening in the world. And we can see this in all kinds of biopolitical forums where people have conversations about their bodily autonomy, their freedom. Nobody gets to sort of touch me, and again, I think these things are good. Obviously, I think it's good to take, if you live near a nuclear power plant, to do what you can to mediate the damage it's doing. I think it's good to tell people to fuck off if they touch you in ways that you don't want to be touched and all that kind of stuff. But the idea that somehow we have moved away from uncontrollable worldly political sphere, which we obviously can't do something about. So now we're all talking about something that's much closer to us, which is our bodies and our bodily freedom and our bodily autonomy. What if that's actually just a sort of shifting of the goalposts and actually diminishing returns in that shifting? And what we really need to start thinking about is really something that's not material at all. We need to start thinking about the spiritual conditions of the world, which include our inner life, our real experience, the radical phenomenology of being human, and start from there. That's what I'm saying we need to do in this year. And it sounds like a tremendous task, but the one that's up to us this year now.
Yeah, it's good. It's have you read, speaking of Ireland and materialism, have you read Terry Eagleton's book on materialism?
No, I like Terry Eagleton, but no, I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's he kind of does. So there's that whole, if you go as far as Jordan Peterson, it's wrong, but it's not entirely wrong. And Eagleton does a really good job of kind of describing the growing prominence of the body in academic thought as, and this is the kind of, I don't want to overstate this because it gets too Petersonian, but as the legitimacy of kind of like communist forms of government began to diminish in the second half of the 20th century, the body became the site of that same kind of political action in academic thought. And as you say, some good things came out of that, but we have been spinning wheels there for quite some time. And it does
too long.
Yes. And that's the bit where, and it's a real jarring thing. Even if you take it, even if you disagree, you're listening to this and you disagree with Conner, like, well, actually, no, the body or material conditions are, I do kind of think they are the state of action. Just take it as a speculative game. Like, what if it isn't? Try it on for a bit and see what that does to unwind how we have experienced both like physically and politically that idea of the body. Because without that happening, you don't actually move to that imminent phenomenological mode. You don't. It's a thing that is built and bordered and patrolled like the Berlin Wall, and yeah, I think it's
that's a great way of putting it. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It's a wall.
Yeah, and that's that's a thing it's actually, funnily enough, like an extended Capricorn season is 100% the time to do that in a weird way, because it almost sounds like going in the opposite direction. Like, well, if the material conditions aren't the side of action, then it must be the immaterial conditions. And in a way, yes, but it's sort of like the interiority or the imaginal of it, and it is expressed phenomenologically. So it's not that we just go, oh well, I'm going to go dualist now, fuck it. It's the opposite. It's just don't have body as wall.
Right. Well, like, I mean, I would say, like, look, it's not dualist because none of this shit, like, we have a misunderstanding of what the material is and how it emerges out of the material anyway, right? But I mean, there's so many things that can be solved or looked at in a new way if we start to do this. Like, I think socialism, is a great place to start. Like, I say what George Orwell said, which is, socialism is not the best thing in the world, but it's the thing that has to happen next before we get to the next phase. I still agree with that, even as I get frustrated with socialists, but I don't mean what they mean. I don't mean what all of them mean. I actually mean what Billy Bragg sings about in song Upfield, where he says, I've got a socialism of the heart. And in fact, he evokes angels and so forth in that song, which is very interesting. What I mean is socialism is an inner step that we need to take. It's not an outer step, and it's very easy to take it. You just look around your room right now. The walls that you see, the windows, the carpet, the pens and pencils, the books, all those kinds of things were brought to you by someone else's labor. If you can really internalize that and see that we're all connected in an economy of kinship and giving and receiving, that's socialism. That's an internal sense of socialism. And once you achieve that, you can move forward to the next thing. Most people don't get that. Mostly the objects that are surrounding them are totally like just clunky things that are around them that they don't know where they came from. They're not connected to the fact that somebody made them. They're not connected to the fact that people have been exploited, all that kind of stuff. You just do this sort of inward turn where you move away from trying to externalize the conditions of socialism into the world and create an entire world economy that actually fucks some people over, even as it helps in a different way than capitalism would. And you do an inner move and you say, okay, well, now that I've incorporated this feeling, I can actually create an entire new sense of politics. I can create a new philosophy, and I can create a new way of walking through and engaging in the world. I know some people are listening to this are going to hate what I just said, but I think it's what's necessary. And I think it's actually socialism's really great and powerful gift to us if we accept it.
See, I just quibble with the word, not the thought. Like, if you put the world around you in flow, you do end up with but for me, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like, it's some sort of utopian tribal anarch model. It's the same. And I sort of cheekily say that you need to privatize governance or privatize socialism, because that's actually what I mean. You actually can be, I think, I know what you mean, but I'm basically done with the word. Although I'm in full agreement completely with what you just said. I'm done with the word. But if the word still has use for you, think about it, just cheekily say, I'm privatizing socialism in 2020. That's what's happening, because it is you can actually you can be governed by what you want to be governed by. You actually can. That's the sort of, and not just can, that's the only thing that's
the only thing. Yeah. It's the only choice. Also, it's how things work now.
Yes.
It didn't make you work like that 200 years ago, but now your soul is composed of it compose and goes in the directions of what you think and feel. I mean, it's just, that's how it is. So you better get you better get that cleared up before you die.
That was one of the other things when we were planning this that you said you resonated with Austin in my chat, which is that normalcy isn't returning. And I've been banging that the last couple of years. I'm really glad that message is getting through, because this is a good example. The people you would have just annoyed with your vision, your inner utopian socialist state, right? There's a whole bunch of tankies out there that are really angry at it if they haven't already switched off because of wailing on materialism. There's a whole bunch of tankies out there that are like, no. And it's I see in particularly tanky Twitter, the same sort of panicked, childlike fear and willingness or desperation to get back to a prior state of normalcy. Like, once we just do this, once this happens and the entire economy is centrally planned across the planet, like, it'll be fine. We get to this point and it's kind of normal and it will return. I just find it dumb and pathetic. This is what I mean. Like, and it's not just tankies. Anyone who is expecting normalcy to return, I think that is gently and lovingly, that is dumb. And I will roll up the newspaper and smack you on the nose with it. So it's the only thing. Like, if we want to do politics in 2020, given how reasonably predictive the broadly speaking Western countries are from a electoral governance perspective, this is what we have. This is how we do it now. This is what utopia looks like in 2020.
Yeah, and the easiest way to do that, and you've brought it up, and I've brought it up many times on our own shows and other people's shows, is to start engaging with the dead. There's no other option. There's just no option. So I bring that up because when you're talking about the tankies and whoever, it doesn't have to be the tankies. It can be the libs. It can be anybody. They think that the dead are not there. And it's like, you've got to get yourself right with death, not just the dead, but death itself. But the easiest way to get yourself right with death is to get in touch with the dead and communicate with them and understand that they're present. Because as soon as you do that, it really rearranges your sense of what's happening in this world. I mean, immediately. And part of that is because they assist you, the dead assist you in understanding things differently, but also because you have a different concept of the cycles of time and what your own life is for, and what you do here as you are, as an aspect of yourself, appears to be embodied. You have a lot of different responsibilities. And so I just think it's like, this concept of material conditions, really, the immediate assumption is that the dead are non-existent anymore, and that's actually the cause of a ton of illness in the world. I mean, our health is dependent on understanding that the dead are real, that understanding that the dead are there and they're able to communicate with us. I mean that in a real way. I strongly understand that illnesses are caused by not accepting that the dead are real and not accepting that something happens to you through death and that you get to go sort of through this portal. And part of that is just because understanding them and talking to them and communicate with them, and just being in proximity with them in an aware way, is a healing act. It does something for your constitution. It does something for your soul and your spirit. So like, get that fucking right. That's just the sort of beginning, commandment of the year. Like, talk to the dead immediately. Do it. Pause the show and say hi to somebody who's dead. And there are a lot of ways of doing that. I just did this whole ritual, this death ritual on Duncan Trussell's show because Ram Dass just died, and I read through it with him, and he was, Duncan was crying, and he was just like, he was here. And I was like, I know, it's just that easy. You don't have to do super complicated things,
It says something deeply significant about reality that you don't. That it is the easiest of things to do, magically speaking. That the imminence of it, and again, it's real good for the space weather. Like, this is a thing. The conditions of 2020 might be materializing, but there's still big dead energy at the end of this triplicity and all the kind of exciting Capricorn stuff that's going on. We also get like intense versions of that, which again, listen to the show with Austin if people are interested in it. But it's kind of like it's the same. It is the same era cosmically that's kind of underpinned a bunch of it. And arguably the other thing that I found frustrating on a personal basis in 2019 is the complete collapse of a credible environmentalism.
I like that you were hopeful enough to think that there was a credible one.
Yeah. I still use the E word, even though, like I say, and it's true, the environment doesn't exist, and I've been saying that for fucking years. But like, you know what I mean by it, which is a collapse in a credible way of improving relations with the more than human world, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, again, it relates to that. Like, you have to understand that the Earth is going to die. Like, and I don't mean that it's necessarily going to die in our lifetimes. I mean, when I say this, people get very confused. I'm not necessarily saying that we're just supposed to witness the death of the Earth, which is what a lot of people are now saying, or that we should just throw a big party because it's the apocalypse. I'm saying in the same way that we need to carry around or understand that we carry around our own death in us, the Earth has death in it, you know? And we need to understand that the Earth is, and we in fact are the caretakers of its death, not the people who are trying to sustain and keep it going. But in fact, even if the Earth is going to die in 10,000, 15,000 years or whatever, and we need to stop talking about 30 years and this kind of nonsense, you know, like, yes, I know you're going to go off on that bit, but even if it's 15,000 years, our duty still is to be the caretaker of its death and to lead it to its death in a certain kind of compassionate way. That's part of what we're being called to do just as people, and we have been for a really long time. And so you bring that up and people come up with all sorts of stupid, you know, responses. One that I got, which I just thought was particularly dumb, was like, as if I didn't know this, like, oh, well, the Earth will be fine after people die. It's like, no, do you really think that we don't have so you're telling me that you don't think we actually have an entangled relationship with the Earth, that there is not a reciprocity there where the Earth and the rest of us have this really deep relationship, and is in some sense here for us, and in some sense we're here for it. Is that what you're saying? And also, as if I didn't know that, I mean, my professor was Lynn Margulis. I fucking know a lot about symbiosis and Gaia, like bacteria.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Lynn. That was my favorite of your episodes of the year. I didn't know you had that recording. We'll talk about her in a bit, but yeah, like, and also that's still the same fetishization of death, like to say, oh, the Earth will be fine once we're all gone. I'm like, you still have the same error. You're actually
right.
And it's almost a sexual interest. It is a fetishization of, you are aroused by apocalypse, even if it scares you or whatever, and it's pathetic. And the fact that and the fact that something that is so important to me, and I always have to keep waving this flag in case people think I'm going to start saying drill baby drill, and I'm so annoyed I just can't.
So annoyed that she said it first.
Is like this, it comes back to the Katherine Pridge thing. Like the situation is too serious for us to afford the luxury of being angry, or in this case, for us to afford the luxury of being terrified of a computer game version of the Earth that is wrong. And in the meantime, there is so much stuff. There are so many ways to be in a flourishing partnership with the more than human world. And instead, it's just descended into, and it's literal point of the timeline, sign of the time stuff. Right, it's just what happens now. But I find that flow-on effect from that same kind of materialist era. I think that's been the most frustrating. It's even pipped the kind of witchcraft and whiteness thing. I think that's been the most frustrating and disappointing thing for me, because I am, like, I mean, look at how I'm living. Like, this is literally how I am invested in how we are in the more than human world, and it's descended into English boomers in red dresses protesting out the front of an energy conference in Africa because they don't want black people to have reliable energy. And my friends, that is genocide. You are like, everyone on the internet is literally a Nazi. That is actually the most astounding imperialism I think I saw in a highly imperial year.
I would like wanting the sanctions on, South American countries for the burning of the on, like all the, it's just the kind of shit, like when when it was actually like Dick Cheney probably behind like a lot of the burning and everything.
Yeah. Or apparently, what was it? Like movie stars setting fire. And the thing is, it doesn't matter. It's actually, if you are using a post-industrial scare story to control the destinies of the global South, you are racist. It is as simple as that, and it's bad. It is a bad thing to be racist.
You're also an idiot if you think that, like, what kind of weird teenage suicide fantasy are you living out if you are constantly considering the world without us? I mean, I'm stealing this point from Zizek. Actually, it's one of he's actually has a really good piece of environmentalism, but it's just like, he's like, look, this idea of the world without us is just another version of having a teenage suicide fantasy where you get to see who's at your funeral. There is no world without us. Like, it's just the matter, like, this whole thing that we're in is, the way I see it is it's more weighted toward us. But even if you don't want to see it that way, it's built on relational loops and interactions and weddings, like the idea that you just sort of pull one part out, the human part, and it just goes on.
But no, it's that is the error. That is an incorrect imperial metaphysics. So it's literally true from a phenomenological perspective. There is no world without us, because that's like, the sensory interaction is preeminent. It flows from that. There is no world without us. It doesn't mean, anyway. Like, I want people to haunt that. This is a real good year for it. I want people to really dig into it. And we're having this discussion, as we should, on the philosophical and metaphysical level, rather than the more obvious and still nevertheless true surface or shallower level, which is in all of these cases of the kind of electoral politics promising things that they assume you want to get in power to not deliver them. We can see hidden hands in that, and most people can fortunately see hidden materialist technocratic control hands in this kind of collapsed environmentalist narrative. And so the point isn't to, I mean, I'm using the E word, and it's a bracket thing, right? Like, I mean, participating in the mutual flourishing of the more than human world. A little bit too wordy, right? I just think we can kind of like jettison that whole discourse and that whole way of seeing the world that tumbles down from that fundamental error, we get to the utopia we want quicker, and we have this discussion philosophically and metaphysically whilst still leaving the fairly obvious science and problematic contested term, right? It is not, we're not denying anything here, is my point. I am actually in fact completely denying that model of reality being true, but which isn't to say everything's fine on the planet. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Well, right. I mean, it's the same thing as saying, like, look, I think that, like, some people's disease processes are helped by Western medicine, but I think the entire picture is wrong, right?
Yes.
It's like, notice, and this is where I will get a little bit mean about it. People who claim to be spiritually, magically inclined, who are into the occult or whatever, and who do not shake off this neoliberal idea of environmentalism or never mind the idea of Western medicine, they're cowards, and they don't actually believe in what they're saying. They're cowards. And you have to be able to stand in your integrity and say, what is the spiritual consequence? And it's not saying that you don't do anything, like, as if these two things are opposed, like, look, I've been talking forever on this show about, like, the material conditions are not the site of action. Do I want to stop deforestation? Yes. And there are a lot of reasons why I want to stop mass deforestation. Do I want to stop overfishing? Yes. Do I want to stop the oversalination of the oceans? Yes. All that kind of stuff. And do I want to, cure cancer and all these kinds of things? Sure. There are things that we need to consider that are spiritual principles at work that are not just like fucking magical versions of the Captain Planet cartoon. Like, there's a lot more going on, and we need to stop being stupid and cowardly about it. And if you don't do anything this year, maybe talk to the dead and work on, having an actual spiritual, conception of what's happening, instead of fleeing into neoliberalism, or worse, fascism, eco-fascism, or whatever else. Like when you're confronted by these difficult questions, which in fact are the challenge of our time.
No one who has, it's just cowards, you're shit at magic. Like no one who has had a profound contact with the more than human world thinks it's going to end in 10 and a half years, which is, I'm keeping that death clock. They're like, I'm sorry, I don't know what you think you're doing when you flounce about in your local park, but that is not how humans and the more than humans are communicating right now. Again, not to say it's all fine. I'm with you. I'd rather like to leave the forests where they are, etc. And it comes back to that same, or different, what I said before about tankies and progressives and so on Twitter, is conflating the existence of a problem with your one unexamined preferred populist solution, and then getting angry if it's and it's that fleeing into neoliberalism, eco-fascism, or this sheer technocratic terror which is being used to kind of roll out tyrannous governance systems, right? Like, yes, there are huge parts of the planet that are in peril from human activity. No question. That's not the same thing as saying, therefore, we should implement this neoliberal control project of the global South. What the fuck?
Right, or anywhere, right. I mean, I think this is the big thing to reflect on right now, is like, we're caught in this weird moment where people think it's the end of the world, right? And the only people that are countering saying it's the end of the world, aside from people like everything's fine, are people that are like, well, it's just another apocalypse narrative. It's neither of those things. It's not the end of the world, and it's not just another apocalypse narrative. What we're dealing with right now is a series of problems that make it appear as if it's the end of the world. But one of those problems that is new, and it is about our era, is that imagine like a figure standing in front of the sun. There's a being that's obstructing our view that it's not actually the end of the world. In other words, there's an extra component now that we have to overcome to actually see the truth. So there's an extra challenge before us right now. I mean, people of all eras always thought, well, no, this time really is the end of the world, but last time wasn't. But there's actually, I don't think, there is actually this added component of something that we need to overcome to get to the other side of that in this moment right now. And in fact, that's the real challenge, more than the end of the world itself. And it's dense, it's opaque, and it's completely materialistic. And that's what it wants from us. And it runs in algorithms. It runs in all kinds of algorithms, socialist algorithms. It runs in neoliberal algorithms, #resistance. It runs in speaking in words that we've used many, many times before. You love to see it, like whatever the fuck else. It runs through us, through our words and through our language. And like, we need to knock ourselves out of the algorithm first of all. And that's, again, what the dead can help us do. But we need to understand that there's this extra, I keep saying it, but there's this extra component this time. So it's neither the end of the world nor just another apocalypse narrative. There's this extra thing there.
I'm going to paraphrase Terence McKenna, because what we were presented with is a cosmic intelligence test masquerading as an apocalypse so as not to alarm us. And he said that it's like a UFO paraphrase for the nerds out there who know what I'm talking about, but it's basically what you're saying. It's a cosmic intelligence test masquerading as an apocalypse so as not to alarm us, because ultimately it's, in a funny way, it is a bigger and scarier thing to get at that root colonized idea in you, from which so much of this so much of the things that have disappointed me in 2019 have flowed.
Yeah. So, and this is that's the question. Can you overcome materialism? And what ways can you do that? And look at the places in yourself where you are actually a materialist, where you think that you're not but you really are. And you can do that in any instance. You can do it in the socialist way we were talking about before, or whatever. But I think that, I love the way that Terence Mckenna said it, so as not to alarm us. It's actually, yes, much more frightening. It's much more frightening because when you get on the other side of this being, you realize that there's no ground beneath your feet. You realize that actually the earth never existed in its own strange way. The world exists, but the earth does not. That all sorts of things that you took for granted are really not there. That's the challenge that, gets presented to us when we get to the other side of this being. And that's why we're so afraid to get past it.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also a way, and again, that's if you are not you, but like listen to this, and if it's hit a few points, that fear and that outrage, that's the inflammation in the body, which is not the state of action, that you should pay attention to, because as you say, like there are people who, and it's why it's time for gently smacking on the nose with the newspaper. There are people who maybe haven't found where that materialism is hiding, and they're people who are, it's a dumb way of saying it, right? But they're good. They're the good ones, and you know what I mean by that, however silly it is. And yes, it's there. It's there underneath attitudes to things. Yeah, witchcraft and whiteness, various hashtags, Me Too, environmentalism, performing politics on social media platforms, all of this stuff.
Let's talk about Me Too real quickly. Okay. I want to talk about that one. Because something that's come up on my show and on other people's shows a bunch of times is it so Me Too has come up a lot because people ask me to talk about sexual politics. But one of the things that I've seen a bunch of times is this weird idea. Sorry, I'm going to talk about Freud now. Sorry, everybody listening.
That's
Freud,
right.
not young.
I get to do the editing, so I can just actually replace it with. I'm going to talk about Tolkien now. Anyway, carry on.
Well, yes, I can't believe you want to silence an Arab sex worker, gay sex worker.
Oh yeah.
So
love it. Love that for you.
So anyway, something that's come up a bunch of times, I promise I'm going to relate this back to the conversation, is this, there's this sort of idea that Freud in his early work said that all kids were like sexually abused and molested and all that. And that's what caused hysteria and other sort of analytic problems later in their life, or analytic symptoms later in their life, that he could help through psychoanalysis. And that in his later work, he sort of took all that back because he was like, well, it can't be, that they were all molested and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just not going to believe it anymore. And really, they're just I've heard this repeated. It was repeated by somebody on my show. It's repeated by a couple of people who have written essays about Me Too as the foundation of why we don't believe victims. And there's a reason why I'm bringing this up, and that's because actually Freud gave us a little key to how to do things non-materialistically with this shift in his stance. What he really meant, and it's pretty apparent to people that look into Freud more deeply than just the surface level, is look, actually, maybe these people were abused, sexually assaulted, molested, whatever, raped, maybe not. But the truth of the matter is their subjective experience is the thing that's really important here. And we have to take it seriously and we have to treat them because they're suffering and they're in pain. So in other words, going out to look for all the proof and materialistic that indicate that this person was harmed is not exactly the right way to go when we're treating people, whether it happened or not. And that's something that we need to start internalizing when it comes to Me Too and sexual assault and trauma and all that kind of stuff, is like the inner condition is the thing that when we want to heal people, when we want to move forward, we need to listen, believe it, accept it, stop going on proof-seeking missions. That's a justice thing, which we can talk about the uses of justice later, but mostly it's turned into carceral and punitive moves that empower the state. So we can talk about that later, but I don't think that that's the move that we want to make. We then see that the subjectivity is the site of healing. The subjectivity is the site of pain, and it clears all kinds of things up. It's like all these clashes between people that were like, well, you're saying that being groped at a club is as bad as being violently physically raped, when the person who is groped at the club is like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I'm in pain. This really fucking sucked. Please help. And they don't have to elevate that to the level of equating some material conditions with other material conditions. They can say, actually, my inner experience is really intensely harmed and hurt. So I bring this all in to say there are models of, even when it comes to something that seems to relate very deeply to the body and bodily autonomy, that we can turn to that are non-materialistic. And in fact, very often, we end up condemning the people that have given us the keys to these kinds of models. And so I think that even for a kind of like healing, and I say this as a sexual assault survivor, multiple sexual assaults, like that were different and under different conditions. When we look to the subjective inner world of people, and when we want to heal, and we start dealing with these unbelieving thoughts, and we start dealing with subjectivity, we're offered something else, and we're offered a better way forward for healing. So that's one way of also just sort of talking about sexual politics as well, since you mentioned Me Too there. And I think that we're going to have to cope with and handle that as we go forward as well, because right now we're living with a culture that's like, okay, you were violated. Let's find the person who did it. Let's punish them forever. And let's also admit that you're completely unhealable. Let's also, throw in that all these offenses are pretty much the same, and that there's not really a distinction between them, and that people who are harmed are completely unhealable. Therefore, the person that has harmed them is completely unforgivable. And let's leave it up to the state to sort this out.
Yeah, working backwards through it, that last piece, it's a question. And again, it comes back to like, I can hear the responses. It's like, oh, so rapists should just go free, Conner. And it's like, no, it's we urgently need, if our goal is not just or not only justice but healing, we urgently need a wider model that doesn't require, as you say, like punitive state intervention and quest for punishment, that comes with a narrative that people who have been attacked in this way are permanently broken, and also on like a weird sliding pH scale.
And we need a whole solution, and a whole solution is not supporting a prison industrial complex that creates rapists and encourages and creates the conditions for rape, creates the conditions for slavery, empowers people that want to do that, empowers these giant companies that run these systems, empowers courts to like take care and mediate these problems, which first of all, it doesn't really help any of these people anyway. It's not working to help them. So it doesn't, like, what, we need a whole solution, not a partial solution. And that whole solution comes from turning inward and understanding non-materialistic healing, non-materialistic relationships, all that kind of stuff, even when it seems that the assault has just been on the body. It's obviously not just on the body. That's obviously psychic. That's obviously intense and violent psychic interaction.
This is the unexamined hidden hand thing, right? Where people with the best ideas in the world, or the best heart in the world, which is to have heartbreak and sympathy and concern for people who have been assaulted in various ways. It's all well and good until, as you say, like, well, what you're doing is requesting, and no one should ever want this, is like state monopoly and violence over the body to increase. Like, that's not the correct. Yes. And so you're actually calling out for more totalitarianism in the face of a tragedy, rather than calling out for as the sole solution, rather than calling out for healing of the person who has been impacted. And I don't know, like it's one of those things where you just have to look at the structure behind what seems like a very noble idea and go, hang on, we can do better. Because again, anytime you're going to get the state to intervene in that totalitarian basis, it will never go well. It just simply doesn't, right? So it's almost like it's another 2020 challenge, which is this is the only thing we can do. The way it's structured at the moment, the only thing we can do is we can assert sovereignty over that that psychic or interior healing, regardless of the kind of legal structure and snowstorm of a discourse around what is obviously a highly emotive and alarming and painful and traumatic subject.
Totally. And a really easy way to do that is to understand that, you know, for yourself, you don't have to present that you are the victim of the completely worst thing that could ever happen to you to deserve help.
Exactly.
And maybe like sometimes it is the fucking worst, most horrible thing and all that kind of stuff. But then as someone who is not a victim, if you're in a position, you don't have to hear someone desperately pleading, I was totally destroyed by this experience, to help them. They might just say, yep, I had a horrible thing happen. Can you please help me? And we help each other. You know, it's that simple. Like, we shouldn't have to play into this intensity game, an attention game to receive, deserve, expect, and give and lend help to each other.
If you are hurt, ask for help and ask to be listened to. That's and you can be, and if you're the person who's being asked, you can do that. You don't need no hashtags required.
And yes, and that's part of it. It's like the world doesn't have to be falling apart for us to do good in it, you know? And I think that everybody thinks that that's somehow like we need to cry at every corner of every single aspect of the world, whether it's Trump or Brexit or environmental collapse or whatever. Everything has to be like completely collapsing for us to do something. But in fact, those cries are what are stopping us from doing anything. Every time that cry is issued, it's issued from a sitting position. And we need to like do more than just sit and cry.
Yeah, that's that might be, if I did pull quotes, which I don't, that would be the one for this show. I mean, we've been chatting for a little while, so I'm kind of like, well, what do we, usually we give people like happy advice, but that's a good one. Like, that's a good chunk of advice. What else do we want to in extended Capricorn season? How do we turn our sexist, racist, drill baby drill rants that we've been going on for an hour and a bit? How do we?
Well, I just want to take a minute and say how much I appreciate Kellyanne Conway. No, I'm just no, I mean, I think like. Yeah. So yeah, maybe some more advice. Speak poetically. I think that that's really good thing to do this year. What I mean by that is that we are all running out algorithmic speech processes for the obstructing being that's coming to Earth right now and incarnating very soon. We can talk about that more specifically later if you want, or people can just email me about it or whatever. But speaking poetically, getting out of the algorithm of just saying the things that everybody else says, whether it's a justice narrative or it's just sort of colloquialisms or whatever, making these different gestures. So when the word occurs to you, like when a weird word occurs to you, I said this on another podcast recently, but like if you go see a movie and you're talking to your friends afterwards and you're like, and you think to say, that movie felt like I was like swimming through thick water the whole time. Like, say that. Get your like default to your subjectivity, to your individuality, and the way that it translates itself through you through speech. Because right now, language is becoming more and more literalized, as it tends to do in times of political urgency. Things become slogans that are very literal, but also like prose becomes very flat. Everything becomes drawn down into a kind of shared objective literalism that allows no room for individuality, because there's always always a tension between objective, exact language and subjective experience. Default to the subjective experience. Don't default to it too often, because then you just become, the crazy cat person. But like default to it more often than you normally would, because you need to be able to buck the algorithm so you can see it when it's happening, and so you can talk to people about it, and so you can assert your own individuality. It's a very simple thing to do.
I like it. It's that sort of lyrical analog mode of speech. It's speech is a theater of the mind war. It's a really good one. And funnily enough, it's an example of material conditions not being the state of action, although still being an embodied practice. So it's quite good in that sense, right? Which is to not even assert just sovereignty or mere sovereignty, but like an individualized analog lyrical way of speech, because it's super tempting, this collapsing, and that energy is going to increase. Like it's super tempting to fall back on memes and love that for me and all of that. You're right, like it and resist it, because it is a process. I don't like this, but suck it. It is a disenchanting in a Gnostic sense. Like you are artificializing the world. You're making it into a virtual reality when it can in fact be flourishing and abundant and analog.
Yeah, I like that. You're artificializing it. Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. I think, going back to what you were talking about with Austin as well, about becoming light, the light, like we have to become beacons this year. So rather than seeking new experiences, and I think this was something that like you guys were talking about, and I kept wanting to say, oh, maybe this is a big part of it. Let me explain. Like when you guys were talking about like, well, maybe this isn't the year to do this new thing or this new thing. I think it's fine. Like actually, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just saying what I heard a little bit and maybe what other people might have heard. So like, I think it's fine to try to do and accomplish new big things this year. I think that what is wrong, what the wrong move would be to seek out novel experiences constantly, to seek out novelty. And what we should be doing is really deepening our capacity and our ability this year, which is a completely different thing. Instead of trying to get the new, really sink into what you can do this year. And as you do that, you'll become a beacon. And if you think about it, it's like, think about yourself as being this beacon. If you're in, say, Alabama or Pennsylvania or Calgary or wherever you are, and you're radiating this light. And then, so I'm in Ireland, maybe someone in England or Cornwall is radiating light as well. And then there's somebody else like in Greenland or whatever. And then that from above, we become these constellations, right? And that's that heroic aspect. I love that Austin was saying like, well, the heroes are these two levels or whatever. Like, I forget exactly how you laid it out, but like you were saying that like these heroic acts were possible. Heroes are constellations in the sky, right? So we can become our own constellations with other people. So as you radiate the light, hook up with others and create these constellations, and then you can do heroic things together. And I think that that's something I try to do with my audience and the people that are Patreon patrons and all that sort of stuff. But I think we can do that on personal levels with our friends. We can do that just by the way we walk in the world, to the way we make ourselves present as well. So that's the task. Don't seek novelty necessarily. Develop capacity, radiate light, and become a beacon for others. And then through that being a beacon, create a kind of constellation with certain people that is capable of heroic acts in this year.
Cool, I like that. So we've got a little like necromancy, speech as speech as lyrical analog magic, and to do it deliberately. I think that's a good idea. And being each other's light. That's cool. All right. Any other ones you want to add to the list? See, I was expecting this. I mean, this has been a saltier episode, but I was expecting this to not necessarily end in a negative, but like, fuck it. Fuck it. This is what I need to be doing. Mic drop. But actually, we've got we're ending on a nice note in the end anyway. Anything else we want to add to the list?
I mean, I just want to add that, like, as you often say, it's like, don't be afraid of what's coming. It's just a Christian message. Be not afraid. Like the year will go for you it can go for people in varying ways, in so many different ways. And I think that when we hear about what the astrological cosmic forecast is, we can get really scared and forget that astrology, at least from my perspective, is a conversation and a communication between our free will and the fixed destinies of the stars, and that's a conversation. The stars are interested in what we have to say to them as well. It's not just our interest in what, and so a lot of things can happen for us in a year. And a lot of it is really, really up to us. So if you have like big projects and big things you want to do this year, do them, but infuse them with the things that we've been talking about on this episode, because that's what brings things into reality this year. That's what brings things into a sense of creation and completion and fluorescence. It's not just doing the same old shit and trying with the will and with outrage to bring the world, because the potency of that is dead. The political will is dead. So much of that is just dead. It just doesn't work anymore. It's doing this other kind of work and then infusing the projects that you would normally try to infuse with a tremendous act of will. And then these things come into being. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I get that a lot. People seem to think that it's some sort of personal or philosophical preference to not do things like that kind of online bullying, outrage storms. It's not like I have an opinion that I dislike them. They don't work. If they were going to work, I'd do them. Right.
Right. Exactly.
The sort of the online behavior and general bullying and outrage Olympics and so on. If they did anything, I would do them, and they do even less now. And we are talking about things for 2020 that do things that will actually work, that are better aligned to the cosmic pH.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's so much you can do, but you have to step up now. And I think that's been your message and mine for people in this coming year. It really is like, what do you want to bring forward? Fucking step it up. Step your pussy up. It's Madison.
All right, sir. I can't really say, speaking of pussies. No. Probably won't find too many of them on your Patreon. But like, for people who want to know more at the end of this amazing discussion, what do you've got planned for the year? Where can they go to find out more about you, etc., etc.?
Yeah, well, I'm actually doing for my Patreon patrons. So it's patreon.com/Conner Habib. For my Patreon patrons, every month I do. It's called the Against Everyone Salon, and that's for people $10 and up. On the contributor level. Actually, in January, I'm doing one for everybody called Why Does the Occult Matter Now? And any patron at any level who's signed up for my Patreon can be a part of that. And basically, I just talk for a little bit, and then we all have a discussion. And we do that once a month. We've done it with topics like psychoanalysis and Rudolf Steiner and activism, environment, poetry, all that kind of stuff, the apocalypse. But this year, I really wanted to offer something to everybody. So that's, why does the occult matter now? So if you go to my Patreon and sign up there, obviously my podcast is Against Everyone with Conner Habib. Please subscribe to that. But also, I want to just say, I want to be more open to people, especially, and this isn't to limit it down, but especially to Irish people. I live in Ireland now, and it is a really intense part of my being. So if you live there, I am really working on, first of all, I'm lonely, but there's like a lot of solitude, but like I'm really working on trying to do what I can to give back to this place that has lived in my soul and definitely in my past incarnations, but also just my being in a really serious way. So please reach out, especially if you're in Ireland. And if you're not in Ireland, you can also reach out too. I want to be more open to people this year to sort of offer what I can and radiate as much as I can. That doesn't mean send me like, a 500 question email, which sometimes people do and expect me to answer every single one, but do reach out and at least just say hello. I'm really open to it this year because what's needed. It's really what's needed as well.
Cool. All right. Well, those details and your spicy Twitter handle will, of course, be in the show notes for people listening. So I think, I don't know what I'm going to title this one. I might somehow make it salty. I don't know. But this was
going to be, we still didn't talk about Lynn. We didn't talk about Lynn.
Oh, we didn't. Yeah.
It's fine if there's not, it's fine if there's not time, but you can sum it up, I guess. Because that's a dead person.
No, that's actually a good point. And I will, if I'm good enough at editing, which I'm not, I will cut around to try and with this towards the end. Otherwise, one of the things, I think it was my favorite episode of yours this year, and I didn't. So you have to tell people the context around the recording of it. I think I'll include this episode in the show notes, I think, because I want to hear about that, because I didn't even know you had that audio. And I didn't realize this because I've read a couple of her books, and I don't want to say it in a negative way, but like philosophically, I felt she had some shortcomings, and it was then she told you that she'd been a whiteheadian, or she became a whiteheadian towards the end of her life. And I'm like, no, respect. That's I'll allow it. I'm not exactly a whiteheadian, but I like them, right? So tell us about Lynn and the recordings, and then we'll have a bit of chat about your understanding of what she meant by that.
Yeah, so my main mentor in life is a woman named Lynn Margulis, who you may or may not know, listeners. She developed the Gaia theory with James Lovelock that the Earth self-regulates like an organism. Is not an organism, but not a mere organism, as she would say, but self-regulates like one. She was married to Carl Sagan. That's how a lot of people know she is. She's won basically every science award you could possibly win, and she discovered, or proved, I should say, that cells with organelles come from symbiotic mergers, and she created a whole theory of evolution based around symbiosis, which is far more accurate than this sort of neo-Darwinian approach that we have. Anyway, incredible person, and she died in 2011, I think. And before she died, I was at her house hanging out with her for like a week or whatever, and I had wanted to start a podcast back then. So I recorded this conversation with her, and it ended up being the last conversation ever recorded with her by anybody before she died, because she died a few weeks later. And I'd been just sort of sitting on this conversation for a long time, and around the anniversary of her death in November, I posted it as an episode of my show. So it's the Lynn Margulis episode. And I start, with a long introduction to her work. That's almost as long as the episode. It's about 40 minutes long. And then there's the conversation with her. We talk a lot about neo-Darwinism, about how natural selection does and does not contribute to evolution, how random genetic mutation does and does not contribute to evolution. And so she also mentions being really into Alfred North Whitehead. Lynn, as my friend described her, was a completely spiritual person who believed herself to not be spiritual. This is kind of the opposite of the kind of people we've been talking about on this episode. People who think that they're spiritual, but in fact are total materialists. And then was very, very interested in the hidden connections between things, and conceptualizing the Earth from the bacterial level all the way up to its totality as Gaia. And really, really had this ability to do it in a way that nobody else, including James Lovelock and certainly Carl Sagan, whose contributions to science are rather meager compared to hers, was able to do. So, and she I've had countless conversations with her, and she's a very important figure in my life, even though I was against her materialism. She bore that as well. She tolerated my manic ravings, although she also would give me smackdowns for them from time to time, which is really good,
Yeah. Did she mean a Whiteheadian then in the sense of an emergent truth, so that like a career looking at different scales gives or yields different truths, and it kind of stacks to a cosmic one? Because that's what I mean by she wouldn't be a materialist in that sense. Like she's essentially like an emergent Platonist, right? Do you think that's what she meant? That like that ultimately the universe has a truth?
I think she also took on from Arthur Kessler and his concept of holons and this sort of thing. So she did say that. I think what she meant by saying she was becoming a Whiteheadian was that she was really shocked to find out that people who were into Christianity could have anything in common with her at all. Right. And so like Whitehead had this sort of like difficult, or interesting relationship with religion. I think that that's sort of what she meant. She had already encountered a lot of these ideas before she had come to Whitehead, but he did sort of appear to her later in life. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. But also no, because some of that came to her before. And I think it was more just,
I think Whitehead does that for scientists. I think Whitehead allows them to kind of have one foot in, one foot out, because it's actually a very neat solve for the whole. I have a career in reductionism, which has yielded things that I know to be accurate, right? And Whitehead has a way of that being still valid whilst like reversing it up into kind of macros and kind of stacking it in a way that I think suits the scientifically minded. Like it allows them, dare I say, an even better Platonism, right? Like it allows them a kind of way of going, okay, so I still have this sort of almost like a flow model version of truth, and there's still a process to it. It's just going in the opposite direction to reductionism. And I don't know. It's I have friends in I've got a very medical family, and the ones that are philosophically inclined are quite Whiteheadian, and that's their solve in their head, is that they can continue to validate reductionism as an epistemology, but they can kind of nest that in a more cosmic view.
Well, that certainly was true. So she was good friends with the philosopher, cultural critic, William Irwin Thompson, who I think, everybody really should read this book, Coming Into Being. It's an excellent book, and it does reference her work amongst others. But, I was with her at the Lindisfarne meeting. So Lindisfarne was like a collection of these like really amazing intellectuals. So Piers Zia, the Muslim mystic, William Irwin Thompson, Lynn, who else? Robert McDermott, the Rudolf Steiner scholar, and people, lots of amazing people. Francisco Varela and Umberto Monterana, all these people. Anyway, so Lynn snuck me, basically, Lynn and Dorian, her son Dorian Sagan, snuck me into the Lindisfarne meeting in Upaya, New Mexico one year. And I stayed in the room with them. And so I would go to all these meetings and so forth. And at one of the meetings, William Irwin Thompson was talking about angels and what they look like. And he was expressing, and he did it really beautifully and a really potent job. Afterward, I asked her, I said, what about that? Like, how did that resonate with you? Because I knew her feelings. And she said, it's just not scientific enough for me. And what she meant after saying that, she meant not, it's not science, so bullshit. She was like, I don't have time. Like, I need to look into the spirochetal origin of the undulopodium of cells. Like, I can't get into the angels because I'm hopeless there. Like, it's too late for me in a way. So yes, that's an answer as well. Like, she was able to allow it without pursuing it. And I think that while that doesn't matter, like while we're both saying like, well, you can't do that in 2020. I think she accomplished quite enough without going down that road. Because for some very specific, very, very specific people, they actually have to build a wall to do the work. But that's becoming less and less important. I think we've talked about that with other people as well.
Yeah. I think she fits into the 2020 advice, because there's a deep intellectual humility in that. It's not that it isn't there. It's like I can only go deep and do a competent job of this one thing. Like of this thing, I can't be doing with other stuff. Like that's actually almost a 2019 Jupiter saying, yeah, have some angels as well. Like it's
right.
So it is actually a kind of weird 2020 mood. It's like, no, look, I'm the microbe girl. This is I work down here with the little things, right? And that's valid. Yeah, but that interested me when she said that. I'm like, I liked it because one of the things that I've read a bunch of her books. I remember when I was staying with you in LA, like, do you know who Lynn Margulis was? And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
That was cool. And that really, as a result, because I've read some of her stuff and was familiar with before and obviously like it, it was, it was nice to hear that. And I'm so impressed that you kept it for that long. I don't know. I would have put it out earlier in a less satisfactory way, but like you did it at exactly the right time. And anyway, for people listening, it'll be in the show notes. And as a fellow podcaster, I really resonate with, I could tell there was urgency, like a school project at the beginning. Like you really wanted people to know how important she was to the world and to you. And you can hear in your voice in that first little bit, like this, like, an over, in a nice way, I don't mean it's negatively, right? Like in a nice way, like to be overly keen, like, no, it's really good. It's really good. Listen to this. And then this happened. And then this. And it was a joy. It was like a really, really nice, it was a nice show, put it that way. It was a nice show and a nice gesture. So well done.
Thank you. And you're actually reminding me maybe the last piece of advice for this show, which is like, and I think you've probably noticed this too, Gordon, after doing a podcast for so long and having so many episodes, actually that episode did well, but sometimes we do things that are really important to us and they don't go out into the world. They're not picked up, even though they're the most important thing to us. Like I had a tweet this year that was the most popular tweet I ever did, which was like a joke tweet about someone from Willy Wonka. And, you know, like 15,000 people liked it or something. And then I'm like, but why isn't nobody picking up on this podcast I did with this philosopher, you know, like whatever. And as the year went on, my urgency and fear about that stuff kind of just left me. I became much more confident and happy about just doing the work that I'm doing and knowing what it offers and just thinking this is the right thing to do. And it's okay if I'm not in that flurry of trying to get everybody to listen to it. Like it will seek its level and it'll seek out the right people and the right people will seek it out. And so forth. And so I think that that's part of the advice for next year as well. It's like, stop that flurry, like get out of that, like that anxiousness and that need to just externalize everything and sing it and say it. That's a version of outrage as well, that kind of frenetic energy. And there's just no place for it anymore. Like do what you need to do because you need to do it. And it will reach and light up the right corners.
Yeah, it's good. It's a craftsman year. Like it's the energies are right to get good at doing the thing you do. But I long ago, I just find it amusing now. The episodes that I think, particularly the solo shows that I think are the best, fucking tumbleweeds, and like I don't. And I'm completely fine with it because I'm like, no, it's a good episode. As you say, it's weird. I get the most feedback from friends from almost like the least popular solo shows. Like oh, I really, really resonated with that. And then it's tumbleweeds in the comments or on social media. And you just, people like it or they don't. And also you just do your best with the work. And that it doesn't matter what it is. It's a really good energy, like a craftsman energy. Be some sort of 18th century Swiss watchmaker with whatever it is you do in 2020.
Yeah, be in love with it. And like seriously, be in love with it. Yeah. That's it. It's really nice talking to you again. And I hope I hope this is a little bit of light for people as well. In spite of our
a little bit of light and some salt.
Yeah, exactly. Like a smack of light.
All right, so well, thank you very much. Really, really good chat, and have a wonderful 2020.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Well, I hope that salty chat gave you something to think about this week on the return to work. I was actually fully prepared for this episode to be even more stark, but if you get optimistic people together for long enough, the whole mood tends to end up pleasingly buoyant, and Conner and I are both devotees of the spell of optimism, right? Not that there aren't confronting and thus grounding ideas to pick over here. I think this is probably the most detailed collection of examples of what I think colonized thought looks like outside the members area, for instance. So one suggestion would be to maybe pay attention to the parts of the episode that may have angered or offended you most, because it may be that you have fallen back on using neoliberalism or statism or whatever as a cover for a hurt that needs exploring. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the purpose of this show wasn't to be salacious, but because confronting enmeshed, wrong-headed ideas and staying with their trouble is 2020 medicine. But, speaking of 2020, we've already got some really fun conversations in the calendar that I am excited to be bringing you. I'm also, in fact, going to be on a few shows myself this month. And if you're aiming to misbehave in 2020, the Wealth Magic course starts in the members area in a few weeks. Between now and then, I hope you all have a very happy new year. Until next time.